Tonight, rare video evidence of ethnically motivated killings in Sudan. Hundreds of civilians murdered after being hunted by Arab militia. So why is the world not calling this a genocide? They shout victory to Arabs as they stand over lifeless bodies after an attack that echoes what happened in Darfur more than 20 years ago.
They never entered Arab houses in the neighborhood. They only go to the houses of black people, break in and take.
We hear from an army officer who says military commanders fled the barracks as families remember those who didn't survive.
We had to bury my brothers in the yard with some dirt and leave them behind.
Sky's Africa correspondent Yousra Elbagir joins me live in the studio tonight to discuss what's often been described as the forgotten war and why it's being ignored. A message to the Kremlin from Poland after Ukraine seized the initiative.
Poland would suggest that President Putin makes a phone call to his chief of staff and tells him to get the hell out of Ukraine.
Also on the programme, how the two candidates for the White House are preparing for debate day. And the Filipino megapastor accused of running an international sex trafficking ring finally arrested after a 2-week standoff. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. The attack started just after dawn with gunfire as residents slept. For nearly 9 hours, armed Arab men allied to Sudan's rebel army went from door to door, hunting and killing unarmed civilians, celebrating with their guns overhead. At least 73 people were murdered last June, but that's just one massacre in one town. The atrocities have been replicated over and over again across Sudan during a 17-month-long war between government forces and militia groups. Let's just have a look at some of the stats. Almost 13 million people have been forced to flee their homes. 25 million are experiencing acute hunger. Responsible for some of the upheaval are the Rapid Support Forces, which began as an Arab tribal militia in the Darfur region. That's the same place where 200,000 people were killed in the 2003 genocide. Fast forward 20 years and civilians caught up in the dawn attack say it feels even worse now than it did back then. They spoke to Sky's Africa correspondent Yousra Elbagir in camps on the Sudanese border with Chad. We'll be speaking to Yousra live here in the studio in a moment, but let's get started with her report.
These are the women demanding answers, forced out of their homes by militias in a national war devastating Sudan that echoes the Darfur genocide of 20 years ago. My 13-year-old daughter is still missing since the day we fled, she says. I've no mother, no brother. I can't find anyone. And these are the men that terrorized her hometown, declaring victory to the Arabs over lifeless bodies. Our investigation with Lighthouse Reports reveals this rare, unseen footage. Evidence of ethnically motivated atrocities against civilians by militiamen, promising to make them suffer. We've identified the victims in this video. 5 brothers dragged out of their home and shot dead in broad daylight. One of them, Abdul Jabbar, was only 14 years old. Captured in a hunt of civilian men from non-Arab tribes.
They take what they want and torture any man they find. That is their goal. They never entered Arab houses in the neighborhood. They only go to the houses of black people, break in and take.
That's our neighbor, she says. He was walking to the well right next to his house. Then they shot and killed him. She says the attack was led by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, an Arab tribal militia turned paramilitary group waging a war against Sudan's army.
We woke up to the sound of bullets, lots of bullets. Suddenly the Arabs entered the town and started killing people in the streets. They entered homes, killing and raping people.
This propaganda video was shared by the RSF, declaring their control of the area in the aftermath of the massacre. Several sources say RSF commanders, including this man, Ali Hamid al-Tahir, ordered the violence against civilians as his troops moved to capture the army garrison. Survivors also told us they spotted one of the RSF's most notorious militia leaders, Noor al-Gubba, walking in the town center as destruction ensued.
It was terrifying. When you have a defense and then it all falls away, what are you meant to do? We had to flee.
He's describing the abrupt withdrawal of the army, with some soldiers accused of abandoning the garrison, an allegation that has come from within the army's ranks.
All of the army's intelligence withdrew before the attack. Soldiers were meant to be part of the defense.
He says the barracks were sold out and that 40 junior soldiers, mostly from Darfur, were killed in the aftermath.
All of the soldiers who were killed were from Darfur, except the compromised commander who was assassinated. The other Arabs had already joined their people during the attack.
Safia's husband was one of the soldiers killed in the battle, but civilian men in her family were targeted too.
My 3 cousins and 2 of my brothers were stood up and shot dead. My father would have been killed too if he hadn't fled. We had to bury my brothers in the yard with some dirt and leave them behind.
Residents say they'd never seen anything like it, even compared to the 2003 conflict in Darfur, designated as genocide.
This time, these guys conquer the army, and then they come for the civilians. If you have a car, they'll take it. They'll take anything in your home. If you have pretty sisters, they'll rape them.
Thousands of survivors are scattered in these camps, longing to return home and reunite with their families.
And Yousra joins me here in the studio. Yousra, really powerful reporting that you've done there. Just first of all, have you reached out to the RSF and the army for a response? And if so, what have you heard?
We have, and the commander of the Sudanese Armed Forces, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, did not deny the allegations of desertion and told Sky News the sons of Arab tribes pull out from the barracks because they are bought with money or on the grounds of racism. We also reached out to the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. They did not comment to Sky News, but they did speak to our partners, the Washington Post, and said the ethnic dimensions of this conflict have been overblown and exploited to manipulate the Western media, and people in Khartoum from different tribes are now living together peacefully, overseen by an RSF commander from the African Fur tribe.
You know, when we see the reporting from Sudan, you've done some extraordinary reporting over the last year or so. It feels like this war, people very much moved on once those evacuations happened. We all remember those extraordinary images that we saw last year. But it also has echoes of what happened in the region, the Darfur region specifically, 20 years ago, and feels like Back to the Future in many ways.
It does. It was very dark déjà vu. I mean, very early on in the war, we were on the border with Chad, and the people were fleeing with bullet holes, like bullets in them. And the targeting was so clearly ethnically motivated, but we didn't have that tangible evidence. We weren't able to see the moment of killing. We weren't able to see the militiamen linked to the RSF in the way that we see in these videos. I think the fact that at the time, I mean, you remember it, we all remember it, it was this huge issue. The world was outraged. There was such a sense of like global responsibility about what was happening in Darfur. Even being in Sudan and being in school in Sudan and not hearing about it and not even, it being a part of daily conversations in Khartoum, in the seat of power, but it creeping in, encroaching through that external pressure. Now it's the opposite. There are people in Sudan really, yelling out to the world, we're being massacred. This is worse than the genocide 20 years ago. and they're just being met with silence.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking a little earlier. I remember when, Hollywood stars like George Clooney and his father made a trip there at the time. There was sort of access, at least, even in those dangerous moments.
Yeah.
But a group that did go on a fact-finding mission was the UN, and they, like you, have found reasonable grounds to believe that the RSF and the allied militias have committed crimes against, they say, humanity, including murder, torture and rape on the basis of ethnicity and gender. I spoke to one person who was on that mission, Mona Rishmawai. Let's just have a listen to what she had to say.
These are the main concerns that we have in that context is the bombardment and shelling of civilians that we think are indiscriminate, and we have credible grounds to believe that they are indiscriminate from both sides. We are also extremely worried about torture and arbitrary detention. There are other violations that are committed by both sides that also amount to violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, not only by themselves, but also by their allies, such as the recruitment and use of children. We have allegations of sexual violence, particularly by the RSF, the sexual violence, looting by RSF as well, by the rapid response forces. So a wide range of forced displacement, the civilians who have been forced to flee multiple times sometimes. I personally interviewed a number of women who were subjected to sexual violence, and I have to say it is really horrific.
It looks horrific. I mean, everything we're seeing and hearing and the testimonies, absolutely horrific. What are you calling to happen now? I mean, given the state of affairs, the number of people that are internally displaced, and then the evidence that is being presented of these, as you say, allegations of war crimes and also the indiscriminate bombardment.
The first thing and the most important is the protection of civilians. We have around 47 million people living in a very desperate situation. The two parties are not, either they are failing to protect them in the case of the Sudanese army, or they are actively attacking them in the case of RSF. So we need a protection force. We need an independent and impartial protection force to protect civilians. We also clearly need for the immediate cease of hostilities. We need the hostilities to stop. We need humanitarian assistance to enter, but we also need accountability. We need the perpetrators to be brought to trial. So therefore, we are asking for the extension of the International Criminal Court mandate to cover all Sudan. The conflict is fueled because there is arming, and because there is financing. So the arming of the parties have to stop. We are asking for an embargo. And there is already an embargo on Darfur, which is not very effective so far. To arms embargo on Darfur, it has to be extended to the entire country and be more effective.
Yeah, there's a number of things I want to unpack there, Ms. Rishmawai. First of all, with the arms embargo, do you get a sense that the countries who are supporting, financing and providing arms, that there's enough international pressure on them to stop?
We need these efforts to be really focusing on the parties, on the financing of these parties, on the arming of these parties, to make sure that also the states of influence in which these arms are being supplied and they are also play their role. We cannot benefit. These states cannot, or entities or businesses cannot benefit from killing women and raping women and children. This is incredible. So in 2024, we cannot live in a world where people just making money out of the bodies of human beings. That's really not acceptable. So we need a lot of pressure, not only on the parties, but on the states of influence, where these parties are buying and trading with weapons and so on.
Mrs. Rishmawai, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I mean, we continue to hear, Yousra, through your reporting, through these kinds of fact-finding missions, that, you know, Sudan's conflict is one of the worst humanitarian crises, but also one of the worst human rights crises that we're seeing on the planet right now, and where these groups are committing these atrocities with impunity.
Absolutely. I think experts are rightfully extremely concerned. I mean, we spoke to the UN Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention, Alice Nadritu. This is what she had to say.
We have reports of entire villages burned, often with a plan to attack announced in advance. We have derogatory and dehumanizing language, such as the use of the word slaves, and it's persistently used as an element of incitement to violence. We also have conditions of life that have been deprived, such as access to water. We've had electricity obstructed. And so some of these elements are identified in your report, and they warrant a thorough and impartial investigation in order to bring the perpetrators to justice.
You know, Yousra, if we go back to some of the root causes of this, I mean, there is a racist legacy to all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the rhetoric, slaves, victory to the Arabs, it's really shocking in a country where you would think that there is more of a unified national identity. But the tribalization in Sudan has roots in colonial history. When the Brits conquered Sudan, when they colonized Sudan, the way that they divvied up land was based on tribal groupings that they decided represented natives or settlers. So when they gave land to African natives, non-Arab tribes, they essentially isolated, marginalized Arab nomadic herders. And when al-Bashir came into power, he realized when he was dealing with a counterinsurgency among those non-Arab tribes that he could mobilize Arab herders who were feeling very kind of maligned by the distribution of land, that they could be incentivized to kill, murder, pillage. That's what we saw in the Darfur genocide. He armed them. These, these divides have been deeply entrenched in, recent history, but also in colonial history. And now we're seeing this explosion of what's been decades in the making. So we have to really pay attention not only to the visuals and to the evidence in terms of video, but also the rhetoric, the words. We spoke to one woman who told us what they said to her on the day.
They said they would take men and women as their slaves, and the pretty women as their wives, and the children will be their cattle herders.
Yousra, when we talk about the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s that went on for well over a decade, almost 20 years, we talk about the numbers that were killed, and there are estimates, but no real numbers, really. It could be as much as 300,000. So far in this particular conflict, the US is estimating 150,000 people have been killed.
It's huge, Yalda. I mean, when we say it's one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, we know for sure it's the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. That is just by the sheer scale, displacement of populations that are besieged by people who are facing starvation, facing famine. This is already catastrophic. It was catastrophic 6 months ago, a year ago, and now it's at a scale where I think those who didn't intervene successfully, like the US, like the UK, are starting to realize that they've got a real issue on their hands. So I wouldn't be surprised in the coming months if we see maybe a scramble to try and resolve a crisis that they've failed to successfully contain.
I mean, we are already seeing almost 13 million people on the move, displaced in some way. We are seeing this. You see 2 million people on leaving through every border, but we're also seeing the biggest internal displacement crisis, 10 million people still trapped in Sudan. So they've been forced out of their home, but they're still moving within this country where there is just this sprawling armed violence that's just moving north, west, south, east. There's nowhere to hide.
Nowhere to hide. And the neighboring countries, Ethiopia, Chad, Egypt, becoming increasingly hostile to refugee communities. When we were in Chad, we were told that food distribution was limited because the government had told them we don't want to to be giving out food and encouraging people to come in. So even food was being weaponized to try and get people to stay away. Ethiopia, we've seen violence against refugees. We've seen them be moved around from camp to camp into places where militias were active. Egypt, people being deported. So the countries that would have been the cushion are essentially showing very clearly that they're not planning to welcome refugees. And also in the report, we speak about the army, the desertion. I think that also speaks to the fact that the civilians who are deeply impacted by this war can't rely on the army to save them. They can't rely on neighboring countries to take them in. They can't rely on Europe, which is obviously increasingly trying to crack down on migration, to take them in. What are they going to do? This is really a problem. And I think we're going to see and look back on this time and realize that this is a dark mark on humanity.
Absolutely. And these two rival generals who are being armed and funded, as Mona was saying there in the piece we saw earlier, finance sponsored with no end in sight.
No end in sight. I mean, I think she really expresses that outrage that we all feel, that there is a sense that Sudan is for sale, that Elbagir, divvied it up, sold it for parts. And now what we're seeing is like the carcass of this country being ravaged by vultures who've decided that we shouldn't have a country that's habitable. And it's very painful to see. And I think people who've studied conflict and who've studied Sudan and see all the waves of conflict and instability it's gone through are still deeply shocked and devastated that we've got to this point of complete unraveling.
And, earlier we were talking about you being a young school student when the war broke out in Darfur in 2003. I mean, it must be incredibly painful for you to see this country that actually rebuilt itself. When the evacuations were happening, the number of NHS doctors I was speaking to on the ground in Khartoum was extraordinary, actually. It felt like the entirety of the NHS was suddenly in Sudan.
I think with the revolution in 2019, there was this moment of hope. There was a sense that we are going to take our country back. We're going to have a place that we can live in, that we can govern as civilians, that we can get rid of this military state that has created so many problems. And that power vacuum that was created when Bashir was ousted after 30 years in power became a space for these generals to try and grab what they can and fight for sole power. So this is a really unfortunate end of that period of hope, of euphoria, of community organizing. But if it wasn't for the revolution, many people wouldn't have survived, because the same people who went out and organized the neighborhood resistance committees are now the ones who are setting up the community kitchens, the emergency rooms, the people who've realized that we only have each other. We only have each other to help and protect, that we won't be protected by the state, we won't be protected by the international community, and that is what is keeping so many people alive right now.
Well, you continue to keep a spotlight on their stories. Yousra, thank you for your brilliant reporting on this occasion and as you continue to report on the country and the region.
Thanks, Yalda.
Now stay with us on The World with me, Yalda Hakim, after the break, a story closer to home.
As the summer comes to an end, I cannot tell you what a relief it is to have finally completed my chemotherapy treatment.
The Princess of Wales says she's focused on staying cancer-free. We'll look at the video shared by Kate.
We're going to evict crazy Kamala.
Donald Trump is an unserious man.
The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
The American people deserve better.
She breaks everything that she touches.
Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes.
Kamala, who's a Marxist.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with her, aren't they?
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first. Welcome back to the programme. We're going to look at a story closer to home now. The Princess of Wales has provided an update on her health, saying she has completed her cancer treatment. Describing her journey through chemotherapy, Kate said it brought her face to face with her vulnerabilities. It's a rare and extremely open insight from a member of the royal family, sharing an experience 1 in 2 people will go through in their lifetime. Here's our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills.
As the summer comes to an end, I cannot tell you what a relief it is to have finally completed my chemotherapy treatment.
In the most personal of videos, the princess welcomes us into what is usually their private place of sanctuary, as they were filmed near their home in Norfolk.
The cancer journey is complex, scary and unpredictable for everyone, especially those closest to you.
This was how she wanted to show her treatment is finished, and you can feel there is a sense of relief. But the palace want to stress she is not cancer-free. Her health and family still come first. In March, she opened up for the first time.
The surgery was successful. However, tests after the operation found cancer had been present. My medical team therefore advised that I should undergo a course of preventative chemotherapy, and I'm now in the early stages of that treatment.
And in June, released this photo confirming she was still having treatment and having good and bad days. Even now, there is uncertainty, which cancer experts understand.
When somebody in this position finishes their preventative cancer treatment, like Kate's chemotherapy, what that would mean is that there's no sign of cancer left, but there's still a risk of a cancer coming back in future years. We're getting better at finding tests that can detect that cancer and better at treating it if it does come back. But I think the main thing is that as the years go by, the risk of that cancer coming back gets less and less.
Trooping the colour was a big day for her, back in the public for the first time, supporting her children and family. There is no doubt her diagnosis has only strengthened her conviction that they are her priority. But inevitably, she also appeared at Wimbledon, and with summer over, questions were going to come up about when she was going to fully return to duties. With Prince William and other members of the family returning to engagements this week, I think they wanted to try and avoid the speculation growing about her health, which of course they saw at the start of the year and was such a dark time for all of them. But what they have stressed is we're only likely to see her on a handful of occasions for the rest of this year. But one event she is hoping she could attend is Remembrance Sunday.
Everyone's kindness, empathy and compassion has been truly humbling.
By allowing a camera in now, she's again shown us how precious her family are, but also making a more subtle request. They still need their privacy. They want that to be respected, as in some ways her recovery is only really beginning.
And I must continue to take each day as it comes.
Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Buckingham Palace.
And undertaking a few more public...
Stay with us on The World with me, Yalda Hakim, after the break. I sit down with Poland's foreign minister, who tells me Ukraine taking ground in Russia is fair game. Plus, we'll cross to the US and see how Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are doing in the polls as the pair prepare to face off in their first televised debate. Stay with us for that. back. We're going to turn to the war in Ukraine now. Well, let's have a look. It's actually Russian territory, which is now the bigger focus. President Zelensky's invasion of the Kursk region is the latest offensive on Russian soil since the war began. Last month, Ukrainian forces stormed the region, catching even American officials by surprise. Moscow struggled to push back against the assault. More than 120,000 people were evacuated during the first few days of the offensive. Ukrainian forces have managed to hold on to the territory for over a month now. So what happens in Ukraine, of course, affects neighbouring countries like Poland. Earlier, I sat down with the country's foreign minister, Sikorski, and asked him if he backed Kiev's offensive. Here's what he told me.
Well, Ukraine has been attacked, and it is fair game for the victim of aggression to defend itself, also on the territory of the aggressor. That's international law. I think the incursion has already had a psychological effect in Russia, has already shown that Ukraine can take the initiative, that in a war, it's never one way, that it goes through ups and downs, and both sides have initiative in various periods and in different fields.
I guess, going back and forth in this way, what is the end game? What would Poland suggest should be the end game?
Poland would suggest that President Putin makes a phone call to his chief of staff and tells him to get the hell out of Ukraine.
That's not going to happen.
But this war could be ended in 5 minutes by Russia. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not have this option because it's desperately defending its independence and, you might argue, even very existence.
So then, given you say that the ball is in Russia's court, we don't think that Putin is actually going to do that at this stage.
Not yet.
Not yet. But what then do you think is the practical moves? Do you think that President Zelensky, the Ukrainians, should just accept that there is a part of eastern Ukraine that they're going to lose and that they're going to have to sit at the end of the day across from the Russians and negotiate?
I'm not sure why you're suggesting that Ukraine should give up its territory. Would you give up your territory? We need to stay the course in supporting the victim of aggression. There was a vote at the United Nations General Assembly, one of the most overwhelming votes in the history of the UN, to condemn the aggressor. This is not a press statement. It's law. And we have a duty as the international community to take countermeasures, to restore the respect for the internationally recognized border.
Russia didn't give Crimea back, though, did it? Even though internationally it's not recognized. You've got thousands of Ukrainians dying, soldiers dying on the front lines every day. And in a couple of months' time, we could see a change in power in the United States. That's why perhaps I'm saying, are there other discussions being had, options that are being explored, rather than this war needs to continue? Because if Trump comes back into power, one of the things he said is, I'm going to end this war in 24 hours.
Well, there's a lot here. Of course, the war could be ended by Ukraine capitulating. But a world in which stronger countries can just invade neighbors with impunity and journalists calling on the victim to capitulate is not a world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world of rules where you cannot change international borders through the power of the fist. Yes, Ukrainian soldiers are dying. They are fighting heroically to defend their country. More Russian soldiers are dying at the rate of roughly 1,000 a day. This is a terrible war for Russia as well. Russia is destroying its national wealth financing this war. And the question is how long they can sustain it.
Do you have faith in the United States sticking the course?
Well, Kamala Harris said in her acceptance speech that she believes in NATO and that she would continue the policy of the Biden administration, of which she is a part. From the Republican camp, we get mixed messages. Some people, close advisors to the former president, say that what they mean by ending the war quickly is threatening Putin with escalation of assistance to Ukraine, to give Putin more incentives to be more realistic. That's a scenario I could support.
I've spent time in Ukraine and I see the struggle that they face when there is a lag in weapons, or, the countries they're relying on have some kind of political debate internally, namely the United States. That's why I ask these questions, because I want to understand better when I say what the end game is. Other than Ukraine needs to keep fighting, what if that is no longer the option on the table for them?
But it is. The European Union has supported Ukraine to the tune of about 120 billion. The United States, roughly 90 billion, mostly weapons, which is very important. Britain and Poland actually do a lot for Ukraine. Britain has just, I think, announced some extra measures. Poland is on its 45th package of assistance. We've provided 4 billion euros of assistance. But this is a tiny fraction of European economy or of
Could they be doing more?
I think we should, because the cost of deterring Putin, if he conquered Ukraine and came to the Polish border, would be much higher.
Well, you know all too well. I mean, is this something that the Polish people worry about?
Yes, we do. We've been invaded by Russia many times in our history. When they threaten us, we trust them. And we think it's better to stop Putin while we still can.
Poland's in quite a unique position because even your far-right groups are pro-Western when it comes to Russia because they understand the threat all too well. But that's not necessarily the case in other European countries, for example.
I think people know and can appreciate when they see evil. Purging whole provinces, stealing children. Let's not forget, Vladimir Putin is an indicted war criminal. Bombing civilian targets, hospitals, schools, housing estates. And for what purpose? For what reason? After 2 bloody world wars, we established a taboo that you may not invade countries on the pretext of coming to the assistance of your compatriots on the other side of an international border. If you have a gripe about that, you go to the Council of Europe, you go to the international courts, you don't send in the tanks. And these taboos are important.
Poland's position on the situation in Gaza, the idea of a two-state solution is also unique. I just wanted you to address that ongoing conflict because, the war in Ukraine has had globally a much more higher economic impact. But the war in Gaza has had a greater social impact in terms of how people and countries feel about it.
There's actually something that links them. The same Iranian drones and missiles that are being sold to Russia to attack Ukraine are also used to attack Israel. In Poland, we have sympathy for both nations. We have a fully accredited Palestinian ambassador at the head of state. We recognize the statehood of Palestine, but we obviously also recognize Israel's right to live in secure borders. And we think it's tragic that they cannot agree to have to separate and for both nations to live within their own states in a peaceful manner.
And just briefly, Foreign Minister, I know you'll say that the US election is for the Americans to decide, but are you worried about a second Trump presidency?
We don't take sides. Poland wishes to have the best possible relations with whoever wins.
Foreign Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
As Foreign Minister of Poland speaking to me there a little earlier. Well, let's go to the United States now, where Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are preparing to face off in what's set to be a fiery TV debate tomorrow night. At one point, it looked as though the show wouldn't happen, with both camps requesting their own specific terms. Well, let's go straight to our James Matthews, who joins me from Washington. And James, there's always drama around these things, isn't there? But I guess all eyes now on all of the preparation that they have as they get ready for the big debate tomorrow.
Hi, Yalda. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The media are full of it already. I mean, it's like a boxing fight night, the way this is being trailed and trumpeted by the various media networks. It's fair to say, huge. We know how big it is because we saw the importance of the TV debate last time. It killed Joe Biden stone dead politically. That's why Kamala Harris is there tomorrow night, her first election debate, Donald Trump's 7th. It will be the first time they have come face to face. So fascinating dynamics just in terms of the optics of it all and the dynamic behind the two of them coming together. In terms of preparation, Kamala Harris has been since last Thursday in a Pittsburgh hotel room. That's where she's based herself. Useful because that's Pennsylvania, swing state. She was able to carry out pop-up campaign visits here and there. Inside the mock-up debate, she's been standing across a makeshift stage from a makeshift Donald Trump, one of her aides, complete with long red tie, slightly oversized box-shaped suit, and also heels to give them height. So that's how she's been prepping. Donald Trump himself, rather less intense, although he didn't spend a full day at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday. His team have been conducting a press conference in the past couple of hours. They're talking about how Kamala Harris owns everything from the Biden administration, talking about some of their attack lines, obviously trying to weld her to some of the more unpopular Biden policies, to the economy, immigration, world conflict, talking about migrant crime waves that have taken the lives of innocent Americans around the country. We're embroiled in wars spanning 3 continents. So that's the tenor of what Trump will take to that debate. Extremely important for him, clearly important for both participants.
Yeah, and James, I guess increasingly also from what we're hearing and seeing, people are looking for more substance, more conversation around policy, rather than what we've seen over the course of the last few months. I mean, with 8 weeks to go, I'm curious what the polls are currently saying.
Yeah, the polls are tight and they are sticking. Harris has enjoyed this consistent bounce ever since she was anointed. But a New York Times Siena poll at the weekend, we can show you it here. Trump is sitting on nationally 48%, Harris on 47%, so certainly within the margin of error. I tell you one poll, Yalda, that will trouble Harris, or certainly show her where she needs to put in work, is another showing in that same poll, actually, talking about 29% of people who want to know more about Kamala Harris compared to 9% for Trump. They're more familiar with him. She has to define herself in this TV debate tomorrow night and to define her politics before Trump has a chance to. The plan, the strategy of Harris is to try to get under Trump's skin. They think if they can flush out the furious Donald, the irritated Donald, the fool Donald, as they call it, that will register negatively with the voters they need to reach in the middle.
Yeah, James, all eyes on that. And we will be broadcasting a special programme tomorrow night on the debate from about midnight here in the UK till 5 o'clock in the morning. So we'll be here offering our guest analysis and all of your insights as well. James, thank you so much. Now, I want to talk about this man here on my screen. His name is Apollo Quiboloy. He calls himself the appointed son of God. He has millions of followers and until recently influence at the highest level of the Filipino government. That's until he was arrested at his sprawling compound in the Philippines after a 2-week standoff with the police. 2 years ago, he was sanctioned by the US Treasury for, quote, serious human rights abuse, including a pattern of systematic and pervasive rape of girls as young as 11 years old. Now, he's gone from spiritual advisor to the president to being handcuffed in court, and that's before he faces possible extradition to the United States. Here's what Filipino officials had to say about that extradition.
Under our law, you need to serve your case in the Philippines first, if you have a case here. This is our sovereignty. This is our law. He is a Filipino citizen, so he should answer first to the Philippines, to all his sins here, to his fellow Filipinos, and then after that, you go by the laws of extradition.
Voices there in the Philippines. Stay with us here on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Lots more coming up after the break. We'll have the latest from Vietnam, where dozens of people have been killed by the worst typhoon to hit the region in decades.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
We're going to evict crazy Kamala.
Donald Trump is an unserious man.
The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
The American people deserve better.
She breaks everything that she touches.
Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes.
Kamala, who's a Marxist.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
A lot of action going on. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
This conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Welcome back to the programme. Let's go to Vietnam now, where 59 people have been killed and 22 are still missing after Typhoon Yagi brought landslides and heavy flooding to the northeast of the country. It's the most powerful storm to hit Asia this year, and as our correspondent Alex Rossi reports, even more extreme weather is on its way.
The force of Typhoon Yagi has been relentless, causing havoc wherever it struck. When motorists tried to cross this bridge in Vietnam, it simply collapsed. As the truck in front of them crashes into the swollen river, the people filming slowly reversed to safety. Survivors could not believe they escaped.
Both me and the vehicle fell into the river. I thought I was at the bottom or near the bottom. I tried my best to float to the surface. I was out of breath. When I was on the surface, I still thought I would not be able to survive.
I was so scared when I fell down. I feel like I've just escaped death. I can't swim, and I thought I would have died.
Elsewhere, the storm has left a trail of destruction, smashing through villages and causing landslides. Authorities say, as well as the loss of life, thousands of homes have been damaged, and this year's crops have disappeared under a brown sea of floodwater. Yalda has been the region's most powerful typhoon this year, and it made landfall along the northeastern coast over Vietnam at the weekend. It had earlier passed through China, smashing everything in its path. Eyewitnesses described the sheer force of the tempest.
As soon as that wind started blowing, you could feel it getting progressively worse, and to the point where it just was not safe to be outside at all. You just couldn't even put your umbrella up. You couldn't stay on the ground. At its worst point, it would easily have knocked you off your feet.
The storm has now weakened to a tropical depression, but with homes still without power, scientists are warning that because of climate change, these destructive weather events will become more frequent. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
And before we leave you, we've just got some breaking news that's come in the last few minutes. The actor James Earl Jones has died. He was best known for being the voice of Darth Vader in the original Star Wars films. He was 93. We'll leave you with these images. Good night for now.